and now I'm still on the boat for the rest of the week. And so many people have come up to me and told me that they liked it, and it just makes you feel good.
Bob James was supposed to be the quiet genius of jazz, a man whose smooth touch on the piano made him a legend in the world of fusion. To fans, his music was the soundtrack of sophistication, elegant, seamless, timeless. But behind the melodies was a man with secrets, and beneath his own home, something far more disturbing than anyone imagined. When the FBI came knocking, neighbors thought it was a mistake. But what they uncovered beneath Bob James's house shocked investigators and forever changed how the world would remember him. What exactly did they find buried under his foundation? Bob James's story began in Missouri, far from the smoky clubs and glittering concert halls where his name would one day be celebrated. From a young age, it was clear he wasn't destined for an ordinary life. A child prodigy, he took to the piano like others take to breathing, blending classical rigor with a restless need to experiment. By his 20s, James was already a fixture in jazz circles, known for his precision, his arrangements, and his uncanny ability to bridge worlds. Jazz, pop, classical, even hip-hop before it had a name. But fame, especially in jazz, rarely came with the flash of a rock star. Bob James was admired, not chased by paparazzi. His albums sold steadily. His collaborations with legends like Grover Washington Jr. earned critical acclaim, and his compositions became the backbone of what we now call smooth jazz. To most, he was the unassuming man behind hits like Angela, the theme for Taxi, or Westchester Lady. A quiet man, content to let his music do the talking. Yet beneath that surface, there were whispers. Neighbors in his later years described him as private to the point of secrecy. His house, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, was well kept but unusually fortified. High fences, heavy locks, security cameras that seemed out of place for a man of his demeanor. He was polite but distant, offering little more than a nod when passing locals on walks. Friends, too, noticed a shift as he grew older. While his public persona remained mild, those close to him spoke of paranoia, an obsession with keeping certain rooms of his house off limits, even to trusted family members. There were rumors of a basement no one was allowed to enter, of renovations carried out late at night, contractors dismissed suddenly, never to return. It was all easily dismissed as eccentricity. After all, musicians are notoriously quirky, and Bob James had earned the right to his privacy. But when the FBI arrived at his doorstep years later, battering ram in hand, the neighborhood would learn that the quiet genius of jazz had been living with secrets that no melody could soften. The question wasn't whether Bob James was hiding something. The question was, how long had he been hiding it, and why? For years, the house where Bob James lived was a mystery unto itself. From the outside, it was ordinary, modest but elegant, a brick structure with well-tended shrubs and a long driveway. But the people who lived nearby knew it was anything but ordinary. They had seen things, heard things that didn't quite add up. At odd hours, sometimes 2 or 3 in the morning, neighbors reported hearing the rumble of machinery. Not music, not practice, but the grinding sound of drills and digging. Trucks came and went, often covered with tarps, their contents never revealed. One resident swore she saw pallets of cement being unloaded under floodlights in the dead of night. Another claimed she heard metallic clanging echoing from beneath the earth, like construction happening underground. Children whispered about the haunted house on the block. They dared each other to run up and touch the heavy steel gate that sealed off part of James's backyard. Few ever made it. Some swore they saw strange men in suits enter the house and leave hours later, carrying briefcases. Others spoke of deliveries, large crates dropped off but never carried inside. Instead, they disappeared into the ground, into that hidden backyard space where no one was allowed. At first, the neighbors chalked it up to wealth and eccentricity. Artists, after all, were known for their quirks. But then there were the disappearances. Contractors hired for short-term renovations who suddenly quit, refusing to speak about why. One local electrician admitted offhand at a bar that he'd been inside James's basement, then quickly changed the subject, his face pale. When pressed, he muttered, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." By the late 2000s, the rumors had grown louder. Some said James was hoarding rare artifacts. Others believed he was hiding something darker. "I think he's building a bunker," one neighbor told the local paper after the FBI raid. But a bunker for what? The whispers never reached the public stage until the day the FBI arrived. To most, Bob James was still the quiet jazz pianist who played Carnegie Hall, not the subject of a federal investigation. But to the neighbors, it felt like confirmation. Something had always been off about that house, and now the world was about to learn just how off it really was. The morning of the raid began quietly, like any other. The sun rose over the neighborhood, sprinklers hissed on manicured lawns, and joggers traced their usual paths. But by mid-morning, black SUVs rolled down the street, unmarked but unmistakably federal. Within minutes, the calm suburban silence was shattered by the sound of boots on pavement and the loud bang of fists against Bob James's front door. "FBI, open up!" Neighbors peered from windows, curtains trembling as the command was repeated. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then came the crash of a battering ram splintering wood. Agents in tactical gear stormed the entryway, weapons drawn, their shouts echoing through the halls of the musician's quiet home. The raid had been months in the making. A series of anonymous tips, coupled with suspicious financial transactions, had drawn the FBI's attention. Reports suggested James had been moving large sums of money through shell companies, funds linked to excavation equipment, cement, and heavy-duty generators. But it wasn't money laundering the feds suspected. It was something stranger. The warrant listed illegal storage and concealment of unregistered materials. What the agents expected to find remains classified, but what they did find stunned even seasoned investigators. The first floors of the house were immaculate, neatly kept, filled with memorabilia, gold records, photographs with other jazz greats. Nothing seemed out of place. But when they descended into the basement, the truth began to emerge. The basement wasn't a basement at all. It was the entrance to something much larger. Behind a false wall, agents discovered a stairwell that led deep underground, far deeper than any residential foundation should allow. The air grew colder, damper, as they descended. What they saw when they reached the bottom would later be described in reports as disturbing in both scale and purpose. It wasn't just a hidden room. It was a network, a tunnel system, reinforced with concrete and steel, stretching beneath the property. The ceilings were lined with industrial lighting, the floors smooth and deliberate. Someone had spent years, decades perhaps, constructing an underground complex beneath the quiet jazz pianist's home. The neighbors had always known something strange was happening under the house, but not even their wildest theories could have prepared them for what the FBI discovered that day. When the FBI first forced open the concealed door to Bob James's underground passage, they expected perhaps a storage room or an oversized wine cellar. What they found was far stranger. The stairwell itself descended deeper than any basement should have gone, and it wasn't haphazard. This was engineered. The concrete was thick, industrial grade, poured with precision. Steel beams reinforced the walls, and the steps were wide enough to move large objects, equipment, crates, or something far heavier. The deeper the agents went, the more the atmosphere changed. The smell of earth and dampness filled the air, but it wasn't the must of neglect. It was the scent of freshly cut soil, as though construction had continued in recent years. The temperature dropped, and the dim hum of generators echoed through the corridors. It became clear that this wasn't a relic of the past. It was active, maintained. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a chamber that stretched farther than investigators expected. Floodlights clicked on automatically, illuminating a cavernous room with smooth walls and heavy steel doors leading in multiple directions. Whoever had built this had not done it alone. This was the work of professionals, engineers, contractors, perhaps even people who never realized what they were constructing. The initial room contained objects that raised immediate alarm: racks of industrial tools, jackhammers, oxygen tanks, barrels of concrete sealant, and stacks of blueprints. The blueprints themselves were disturbing. They mapped out not just the tunnels beneath James's house, but a network that seemed to extend beyond his property lines. The plans were labeled with cryptic symbols and notes in handwriting the FBI believed to be James's own. In one corner stood rows of filing cabinets, their drawers locked tight. Bolt cutters made quick work of the locks. Inside, agents found reams of documents, receipts for excavation equipment, handwritten notes detailing the soil composition of different layers beneath the property, even correspondence with anonymous contractors. Many were unsigned, others contained signatures that were later confirmed to be fake. But it wasn't just the infrastructure that disturbed investigators. There were personal items, too. Photographs of the construction phases, Polaroids of tunnel entrances, even candid shots of workers mid-dig. Some of the photos had names and dates scrawled on the back, as though James had been cataloging the entire process like a project. What unnerved the FBI most was the scale. These weren't crude tunnels. They were corridors, hallways, chambers large enough to house gatherings. It wasn't a bunker for survival. It was something else, something built to hide, to contain, or to store. The startling discovery forced the agents to pause. Why would a jazz pianist, a man known for composing gentle, smooth melodies, go to such lengths to build an underground labyrinth beneath his home? What could possibly have driven him to dig into the earth with such obsession? The answer lay deeper in the tunnels. The further the FBI pushed into the underground structure, the more surreal the scene became. The tunnels stretched like veins beneath the neighborhood, branching into multiple directions. Some led to dead ends, as though construction had been abandoned mid-project. Others opened into rooms so bizarre they seemed like fragments from a nightmare. The first room beyond the entry chamber was filled with shelves stacked with boxes, old, dusty, but meticulously labeled. Inside were clippings from newspapers, magazines, and jazz periodicals. They weren't about Bob James himself, but about disappearances, scandals, and obscure mysteries spanning decades. Articles on missing persons, unsolved crimes, and strange occurrences were arranged in chronological order. It was as if James had been collecting stories of the world's forgotten tragedies, hoarding them underground. Another tunnel led to a chamber filled with mannequins, life-sized, human-like, posed in rows. Some wore suits, others dresses, and many bore wigs styled to look eerily real. Each mannequin had a name tag hung around its neck, handwritten in marker. Investigators later confirmed some of the names matched real people, fans who had written to Bob James, session musicians he'd worked with, even critics who had once reviewed his albums. The mannequins weren't just props. They were stand-ins for people, part of a disturbing catalog of identities. Farther in, the tunnels revealed something even more troubling. A hidden room with walls lined in corkboard, covered with maps, photographs, and strings connecting pins in a sprawling web. At the center of it all was a single word scrawled in red: foundations. What it meant, no one could immediately determine. Some agents speculated it referred to structural foundations, perhaps an obsession with building. Others believed it was symbolic, foundations of society, music, or something darker. But the strangest discovery was an unfinished shaft that seemed to descend even deeper. Its walls were raw dirt, and wooden beams supported the precarious structure. Tools lay abandoned, as though the diggers had suddenly stopped mid-project. The shaft was wide enough to suggest an intended chamber or corridor below, but its purpose remained a mystery. Investigators speculated endlessly. Was James building a personal archive? A bunker? A shrine to something only he understood? The truth remained elusive, but one thing was clear. This wasn't eccentricity. This was obsession. Decades of careful work, hidden beneath the very feet of his neighbors, invisible until now. The tunnels were unsettling, not only because of what they contained, but because of what they implied. How many years had this gone on? How many people had seen glimpses and chosen to remain silent? And most disturbingly, what else might still be buried down there, waiting to be unearthed? If the tunnels themselves were strange, the evidence found within them was something else entirely. The FBI, seasoned in uncovering criminal enterprises, described the discoveries as deeply disturbing in their internal reports. It wasn't just the scale of the underground complex, it was the artifacts James had chosen to hide. In a locked steel chamber at the farthest end of the tunnels, agents found rows of sealed crates. Some were marked with shipping labels dating back to the 1970s. Others bore only symbols, triangles, circles, and numbers etched into their wood. When pried open, the contents startled even hardened investigators. Inside were collections of items that seemed random, but taken together, suggested a pattern of obsession. One crate contained personal belongings, wallets, ID cards, and driver's licenses of people who were never reported missing, but whose connection to James was unclear. Another held reel-to-reel tapes, dozens of them, labeled with dates, but no description. When played, the recordings contained not music, but conversations, muffled voices, snippets of interviews, and sometimes nothing more than the sound of footsteps or silence, as though someone had recorded the ambience of rooms without consent. In another box, agents discovered what appeared to be soil samples, each sealed in jars and labeled with coordinates. The FBI later confirmed these coordinates didn't just map his property. They extended to various sites across the country, places James had visited during his tours. Why a musician would collect earth from so many locations remains unexplained. But the most shocking evidence came from a folder of photographs found in a metal filing cabinet. The images depicted people, ordinary, everyday individuals, standing near the entrance to James's house. None seemed aware they were being photographed. The dates spanned decades, suggesting James had been documenting visitors, neighbors, even delivery men, in secret. Alongside the photos was a journal, written in James's hand. Its entries veered between mundane notes on music compositions and cryptic reflections. Lines like, "The foundation is deeper than they know," and "Every life leaves an echo in the soil, unsettled agents." The writing seemed to reveal a man whose genius had crossed into obsession, blending art, paranoia, and something far darker. The evidence was enough to spark speculation. Had Bob James been leading a double life? To the world, he was the soft-spoken jazz pianist who defined smooth sophistication. But beneath his house, the FBI uncovered a labyrinth of secrets that pointed to a man consumed by compulsions no one understood. What shocked investigators most wasn't just what they found. It was the question of what they hadn't yet uncovered. The tunnels stretched beyond the mapped area. Some doors remained sealed, too unstable to open during the first raid. And in the shaft that plunged deeper into the earth, agents could only peer into the darkness, unsure of what lay below. Whatever the answers, one thing was certain. The discoveries beneath Bob James's house had rewritten his story forever. To the outside world, Bob James was the very image of a disciplined musician. He was punctual to rehearsals, endlessly polite in interviews, and fiercely dedicated to his craft. Yet, as the FBI combed through the disturbing network beneath his home, a new narrative began to emerge, one that suggested a man leading a double life. The crates, the journals, the mannequins with names around their necks, these were not the harmless eccentricities of an aging artist. They hinted at an obsession with control, cataloging, and surveillance. Investigators noted how meticulously everything was arranged, as if James had built an entire alternate archive beneath his home. But what was the purpose? Some agents whispered about psychological compulsion, others about something criminal. The tapes were perhaps the most unsettling clue. Hours of reel-to-reel recordings documented mundane conversations, people in restaurants, musicians backstage, anonymous chatter on city streets. Some seemed to be taken without consent, the microphone hidden or the recorder left running in places it didn't belong. What was James collecting? Background noise? Voices? Proof of presence? The act itself suggested something far more intrusive than art. Then there were the photos. Stacks of images, often blurred, taken from odd angles. Neighbors caught unloading groceries, strangers walking down sidewalks, a child waiting for a school bus. None posed, none smiling, just ordinary people, frozen in secret snapshots. The fact that these photos spanned decades, beginning in the 1970s and continuing until the years before the raid, revealed a chilling pattern. This wasn't a phase. It was a lifelong obsession. The FBI couldn't ignore the possibility that Bob James had been conducting surveillance. Why, and on whose orders, remained unanswered. Some speculated he was paranoid, convinced people were out to get him, and these records were his way of keeping proof. Others thought it could be blackmail material, carefully hidden until needed. A darker theory suggested something ritualistic, that James believed these voices, photos, and soil samples preserved echoes of life itself, part of an obsession hinted at in his journals. The press, hungry for answers, seized on the double life narrative. Tabloids splashed headlines, jazz legend's secret bunker exposed, and what was Bob James hiding? Fans were divided. Some refused to believe it, insisting the evidence was misunderstood, the work of an eccentric mind rather than a dangerous one. Others began combing through his lyrics, his album covers, even the structures of his compositions, convinced there were hidden messages all along. For investigators, the question remained, was Bob James simply eccentric, or had he crossed a line that made him dangerous? The disturbing discoveries didn't offer a clear answer, but they raised suspicions that the world's image of him, the quiet pianist, the father of smooth jazz, was only half the story. And the more they uncovered, the more those suspicions grew. When the news of the FBI raid broke, Bob James's friends and family were blindsided. For decades, they had known him as a private but gentle soul, a man more interested in chord progressions than controversy. To them, the idea that he had been hiding a labyrinth of tunnels beneath his home seemed unthinkable. His colleagues in the jazz world struggled to reconcile the discoveries with the man they knew. Saxophonists, bassists, drummers who had played with him over the years described James as meticulous, but never threatening, disciplined, but never cruel. He was the last guy you'd expect to be caught up in something like this. One longtime collaborator told reporters, if he had secrets, he hid them damn well. Family members, however, admitted to small signs of strangeness. One relative revealed that James had always been obsessive about privacy. He would lock certain rooms of his house, even when close family visited. He rarely allowed anyone near his basement, insisting it was unfinished, or unsafe. Another remembered odd comments he made about the foundations and how every place has a memory buried in the ground. At the time, they dismissed these as the musings of a quirky artist. In hindsight, they took on a more sinister tone. Neighbors who had long suspected something strange felt vindicated. They recalled the odd construction at night, the sudden dismissal of contractors, the heavy trucks arriving at all hours. "We knew something wasn't right," one neighbor said. "But FBI level wrong? No one saw that coming." The unanswered questions tormented everyone. Why build tunnels of that scale? Why hoard personal artifacts, photographs, and recordings of strangers? Why label mannequins with real names? None of the discoveries pointed to a clear crime, yet all suggested intent, an intent no one could fully explain. Some believed it was an elaborate art project, an installation never meant for the public. Others thought it was paranoia, the desperate measures of a man who felt watched and decided to watch back. The darkest theories suggested something far worse, that James was hiding evidence of crimes that investigators had yet to uncover. The FBI remained tight-lipped, releasing only fragments of information. But the damage was done. Friends, family, and fans were left staring into the abyss of unanswered questions, wondering how much of the man they loved had been real, and how much had been a facade covering something deeply disturbing. As weeks turned into months, the FBI investigation deepened. While official statements were scarce, leaks from within the agency painted a picture more unsettling than anyone could have imagined. Reports surfaced that some of the soil samples matched locations tied to unsolved cases. Not murders, necessarily, but disappearances, people last seen in towns where Bob James had performed. The connection was circumstantial, yet chilling. Why would a jazz musician collect dirt from those very places? The tapes, too, hinted at something more deliberate. Forensic experts discovered subtle patterns in the recordings. Times, dates, locations. It seemed James wasn't just recording randomly. He was cataloging. Each tape was paired with a logbook, noting who was present, what was said, and where it was. The journals revealed cryptic entries like, "Their voices sink deeper than the ground," and "One day the soil will speak." The mannequins raised further alarm. When cross-referenced, many of the names on the tags matched real people who had crossed paths with James. Session musicians, critics, even fans who had written letters or attended meet and greets. The mannequins weren't random. They were effigies of people James had known, perhaps even watched. But why immortalize them underground, in tunnels hidden from the world? The FBI considered releasing a full report, but hesitated. Too much was speculative, and the musician's fame complicated matters. To accuse without proof risked defamation. To remain silent risked suspicion of a cover-up. Ultimately, the public was fed only fragments. Confirmation of the tunnels, acknowledgement of unusual collections, and the assertion that no immediate threat to public safety had been uncovered. But the leaks told a different story, that Bob James's underground labyrinth was more than eccentricity. It was a map of obsessions, a shrine to secrets, a structure that hinted at truths the public was never meant to see. The official narrative remained vague, but the unofficial one spread like wildfire. Fans began to pore over his music, convinced the answers were hidden in melodies, in chord changes, in the spaces between notes. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some believed he was part of a covert government program, others that he was documenting paranormal activity. A few even claimed the tunnels were connected to larger underground networks beneath the city, part of something far bigger than one man. What the FBI truly discovered beneath Bob James's house may never be fully known. But what is certain is this: the world's image of the quiet jazz pianist had been shattered forever. In the end, the story of Bob James became less about his music and more about the disturbing labyrinth beneath his home. His legacy, once defined by gentle piano riffs and sophisticated jazz arrangements, was now entangled with tunnels, mannequins, tapes, and secrets. The question that haunts his story isn't just what the FBI found, but why. Some argue that James's underground complex was the manifestation of artistic obsession taken to its extreme. Just as he meticulously layered sounds in his compositions, he layered secrets beneath his home. The mannequins, the journals, the recordings, these were his instruments in a symphony no one was meant to hear. Others believed the discovery revealed a darker truth, that genius and madness had intertwined. The meticulous order, the obsessive cataloging, the fixation on soil and voices all point to a mind consumed by compulsion. Whether criminal or not, it was deeply unsettling. For fans, the revelations were devastating. The man who had scored their lives, whose music played at weddings, graduations, and quiet nights, was suddenly cast in shadow. Could they still listen to Angela or Westchester Lady without picturing the tunnels beneath his home? Could they separate the art from the secrets? Historians of music were left grappling with the legacy. Bob James had shaped the sound of smooth jazz, influencing generations of artists and even hip-hop producers who sampled his work. Yet his name now carried an asterisk, forever tied to the disturbing discovery. His genius remained, but so too did the suspicion. And perhaps that is the true tragedy. The disturbing discovery beneath Bob James's house didn't just redefine his legacy, it fractured it. He would be remembered not only as a pioneer of jazz, but as a man whose hidden life beneath the surface left more questions than answers. In the end, the tunnels may have been sealed, the evidence boxed away, but the haunting question remains: what was Bob James really building? And why was the world never meant to know? The FBI's discovery beneath Bob James's house turned a jazz legend into an enigma. His music remains timeless, but his secrets cast a disturbing shadow. Was it art, madness, or something far darker? What do you think? Can genius ever be separated from obsession? Subscribe, comment, and join the debate.